since we're distanced, pictures go a long way, so I just have some slides to go with the talk today. And I really wanted to talk to everybody. There's been a lot of interest of late on not just food security, but also just not wanting to go to the store if you don't absolutely have to. Less trips to the store for the easily perishable items like your lettuces and some of the things that you can easily grow in your garden. So if we can grow it, why not, at least a little bit? I did a video a little while ago on Victory Gardens and the impact that they had. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that today and how to get you guys started quickly if you already don't have established gardens. So 99% of our food is shipped from thousands of miles away. California, Chile, all over the world, things are getting moved. My husband the other day was looking at, I believe it was a jar of olives. I can't remember what item it was, but he was like, did you read this? And he read me the label, and it was farmed in South America somewhere, shipped to Europe, and then I purchased it in the US. So that food system that we have been relying on, all it takes is one small disruption, like something that we're experiencing now, and things aren't as stable as they were. And if we look to the Victory Gardens in the 1940s, the US government at the time requested citizens to start growing a little bit of their own food. And they distributed pamphlets, and they had radio talks and all sorts of information. They just tried to flood as much information out there as possible. And it was 1943 that statistic is from, but 20 million, it's estimated that 20 million home gardens were being grown at that time. And from these people who had zero training, professional training, they were not farmers, they were not full-time anything. They were still working other jobs, they had families, they were able to grow 40% of America's food on these small home plots in the urban cities, in the suburbs, wherever they were, they grew a little something. And I think oftentimes we discount what that impact can have. So even if you only have a patio or a windowsill or a small urban lot, you can still make a difference, and you can still help provide your family with nutrient-dense food. This is a little bit more in depth, and this is kind of what actually started me down my path and interest in sustainable and organic gardening. I started reading books on the lack of nutrition in our food today and the impact that it could have on my health and my family's health. And it was shocking. And that's what really started getting me into growing things on a little bit of a larger scale and taking the time to learn. And it's been a process. I've gardened my whole life, but certainly not to any sort of magnitude or anything. And it was just in the past few years that it's been about 7 or 8 years now that I really started to get interested and really focus in on this. And that is why a lot of people, like I was saying, they overlook the potential. So we all live in an urban setting, and we all immediately think like you need acres to grow your own food. You need space, you need training. And just as an example, you can, in just the Boston Commons, if you were to take an area the size of the Boston Commons, which is only 50 acres, look at how much food we could be producing. So regardless of if it's one congruent piece of land, or whether it's a bunch of front yard gardens, patchwork all over the city, it all still amounts to the same amount of space and the same potential for growing and feeding our families. I have my training in wildlife ecology and conservation. So Aldo Leopold is kind of infamous in wildlife management, and he has a quote that says, "We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." And I absolutely love this quote because Oftentimes we try to force things or make it fit our idea. And oftentimes if we work with what's available to us in our area, and if we allow nature to guide what we plant or when we plant or how we plant, success is almost guaranteed when we work with nature. So here are a few, I know since this is a SUAC meeting, a lot of people probably already do have gardens, but for those who don't, I just wanted to remind people that there are things, although a lot of vegetables do need a little bit more soil and a little bit more attention and care than our sandy soils, there are a lot of crops that you can grow in our environment and in our climate without much care or input at all. And this also makes a difference too for even those who do have gardens. If you want to scale things up a little bit and start bringing in a lot more food than you typically would off of your smaller gardens, this is a way to do that. You don't have to go out and build the beds or make your compost. If you really want to scale up quickly, these are some crops you might be able to consider growing right now. All coming into the summer months does just great. And once we start getting our rains, which might be another month or so, but once we start getting our rains, it's literally pretty much a hands-off type thing for all of these. So the first of the 4 crops that I wanted to cover here are cowpeas. And those are, I don't know, 1,000 names: cowpeas, field peas, southern peas. These are your typically viewed as like dried beans that you would put in your pressure cooker or your stew pot to cook down. But you can technically eat the fresh shell beans as well for an immediate crop. And a lot of people overlook the fact that you can also eat the leaves. They are really high in protein, niacin, vitamins, antioxidants, and tryptophan. They actually are used in Africa for pregnant women. They save the cowpea leaves for pregnant women because they're so high in vitamins. And I can't remember which mineral, I think it's like folic acid, I'm pretty sure, that it has in reasonable amounts that helps the women during their pregnancy. So there's a lot of amazing health benefits to cowpeas. And that tryptophan, so we all know tryptophan from turkey dinner and Thanksgiving, and we all feel so happy and chill during those times. Tryptophan is a mood booster. It makes everybody calm and relaxed, and who doesn't need a little bit of that right now? I think if all of us could have a little less stress or a little something to help with that, it would not be a bad thing. There are also immune boosting properties that they found in the cowpeas themselves. And I'm actually in the middle of taking Corinne's permaculture course, and she always says you can never have one use for something, you have to have multiple, right? So not only is it a edible food crop for us that's easy to grow and has incredibly high yields, it also fixes nitrogen so that if we're rotating other crops into the area or into our garden beds, it's going to help improve the soil fertility for the next round of crops. And it's also a cover crop. So a cover crop is something that is going to cover the soil, especially if we have a ton of raised beds or a lot of area that's exposed. If we do have that quality soil, say the compost or whatnot, we don't want that to be exposed to the rain and the wind and the sun beating down on it in the summer months when most people aren't as willing to garden. So a cover crop basically protects the soil from all of the erosion and compaction and leaching of nutrients out of the soil. So definitely a wonderful thing to consider. Sweet potatoes is the next crop, and it's a wonderful staple crop. It grows mostly year round here. They slow down, you get very small crops over the winter, but essentially they can be a perennial here as long as we avoid the super hard freezes, or you take some cuttings and bring them in over some of the cooler winter months. But sweet potatoes, of course, we do eat the root. That's the main crop that most people think of. But yet again, the leaves are also edible, so it can give you a quicker return So just like with the cowpeas, you know, it's going to take time before we get our harvest of beans or potatoes. But in the meantime, we can be harvesting something usable to put on the table very quickly, especially with the sweet potatoes. Once a sweet potato gets a couple of roots in the ground, it's off to the races. So you can harvest pretty much with abandon on the leaves, and it will have no effect on the sweet potatoes themselves. So they're extremely high in fiber. They have some great vitamins A and D. They're known to boost immunities, and they're also good. They treat minor cases of asthma and bronchitis with sweet potatoes in rural communities. And as we all know, with this going around, any sort of lung health and lung improvement would probably not be a bad thing to consider. Including the diet. So they're also anti-inflammatory and tasty as well. You can get a fairly large crop, fairly large yield. It's about 1/4 pound per square foot, but they take little to no maintenance, and they can grow on our sandy soils, or if you have any sort of mulching or anything like that, they really thrive in that environment. So for little to no care, you can get quite a large return. For our added bonuses to the crop, it attracts pollinators. They have beautiful little purple and white flowers. They make a good ground cover and a cover crop as well. So you can kind of let them ramble and do their things. If you have an area of the yard that you'd rather not mow anymore and want to make productive, this could be a good option. The next crop that I have up here is amaranth. And a lot of people are familiar with quinoa. I like to say this is the warm weather quinoa of the whole grain world. It produces almost like a couscous, but a couscous is a processed pasta, essentially. This is a whole grain. And you can harvest the dried grains off of the flower heads like you see here. It's not the prettiest of pictures. They actually have absolutely gorgeous blooms, but I wanted to show the grain portion as it starts to dry out. But this is something that you can harvest for grain and eat the leaves as well, yet again. The young tender leaves can be used raw in salads. The mature leaves do get a little bit tougher, but they can be cooked down just like a cooking green would. They're really high in protein, which is a wonderful thing if you are uncertain about going to the grocery store or your food sources and food security. They also have a lot of calcium, vitamin E, iron, magnesium, all sorts of wonderful minerals and nutrients that are essential for a healthy immune system. They are gluten-free and they're really easy on digestion. So a lot of people that have sensitivities are able to eat amaranth without any issues, which is awesome. And they also self-seed readily. So if you have to purchase the seed up front, in most cases, you'll never have to purchase it again. In most places, this is another name it goes by is pigweed. It's considered a weed by a lot of people, but in my eyes, how can it be a weed when something is so productive and nutritious for us to use? Just pull it out if it pops up somewhere you don't want. They do have the gorgeous blooms and they attract pollinators. So it's just a really nice thing to include in and around the garden. And I certainly wouldn't waste bed space unless that's really what you want. These can easily grow in our sandy soils without any issues. The last one I think a lot of people may be familiar with if you've been in the gardening realm, but if not, moringa is a wonderful permaculture plant, perennial plant to include in your landscape somewhere, tuck it away anywhere. Everybody should have one. They are incredibly fast growers, so a lot of this talk is about how to get you guys growing quickly and get you a return. Moringa can grow 20 feet in a year if you let it. It's just insane. So this is something, even though it is a tree, that you will be able to use and harvest from very, very quickly. You eat the leaves. You can eat them raw, but typically they're dried. They're more potent when they're dried and put in powders. You can put them in different food dishes, smoothies, anything like that. They are very, very high in protein as far as plants are concerned. They also have a ton. They have 92 different nutrients, so lots of minerals. They're known for being an immune booster, and 20, 30 different health benefits to it. Cardiovascular disease, anti-inflammatory, all sorts of amazing properties to it. Once established, they essentially need no water and no input from us. They would do a little bit better in a little bit of a loamier soil, but in most cases, the moringa is going to be it's going to grow so quickly that it's going to be more of a hassle keeping it in check than allowing it to thrive. So in most cases, you don't really need to amend the soil, although you can if you'd like. They can offer, a lot of people have been coming to me recently, they're getting their gardens started for the first time, and they have full sun gardens. And in Florida, that is a lot of sun for most of our true veggie crops, like, you know, your tomatoes, your lettuces, that kind of thing, the things that we're going to be planting into the beds. So a lot of times I'll suggest planting a moringa to the west side of it to offer a little bit of shade for their garden that grows really quickly. So they can offer shade if needed, and you can consider it to be a chop and drop. So you can basically just whack it down once, twice a year. You can use the foliage as mulch. You can cut up the larger branches and pieces for firewood. So there are a lot of other uses just besides the leaves for moringa. So those are all things that can easily be grown in our summer months in our sandy soils with next to no input from you. Like I said, once the rains get going, they pretty much will maintain themselves. Some of them will get a few pest issues. You might see some aphids on the cowpeas. In my experience, I never actually treat those aphids. I kind of let them do their own thing. The ladybugs seem to keep things in check just fine. So really, it's quite minimal inputs on your part for all of these crops. This is something that I also wanted to include because everybody is concerned about now. And all of those crops, although they do produce rather quickly, they're not immediate. If you want immediates, something to consider could be microgreens. They're not going to be for everybody, but they could be for people who may not have access to a yard at all or a community garden because the gardens are shut down right now. These can be grown literally anywhere, indoors or out. They can be, as long as you have a little bit of sun for them in those last couple of days, you can grow microgreens. They've done studies, and it does depend on your growing medium, the soil that you plant the microgreens into, but they're about 10 times more nutrient dense than the adult counterpart. So microgreens are essentially baby plants. You're harvesting the immature plants typically before they even get true leaves. So you've got all of the nutrition that the seed had packaged inside and saved up for the growth spurt still in the plants. And that's why they're so much more nutrient dense. It depends on the crop and which seeds you're planting, but they're ready to harvest in 10 to 14 days. So you guys could literally go out, get your seeds and get your soil, plant them tomorrow, and you could be harvesting it within 2 weeks, which is a huge perk if you're really concerned about getting something started right away and getting that feedback loop right away. The other nice thing about microgreens is that you can plant enough for one small person who's living alone, or you can plant enough to grow for 10. So sometimes if you're living by yourself, or if you only have 2, if you plant an entire patch of sweet potatoes, you're probably going to have way too many sweet potatoes at one time. This can kind of be curated and scaled to whatever your family needs. It's fairly minimal startup and space. It can literally be a tray that drains or anything like it. You don't have to go out and buy 10, 20 trays if you don't want to. You can literally poke some holes in the bottom of a milk jug or an egg carton or anything you have laying around the house. You will need coconut coir, and I suggest worm castings. If you have compost, that'll do the trick. Coconut coir is very reasonably priced. Worm castings are a little bit pricier, but this soil is reusable over and over and over again. So it's not too tough. The one downfall, and it is a fairly significant downfall, is consistent seed input. That's where you're going to be spending your money, and it's certainly not as sustainable as some of the other crops. So because these seeds, these plants aren't growing up to their adult form, you're not able to harvest and save the seed. So you will have that consistent input of purchasing seeds from an outside source when you do something like this, but it does give you intense nutrition in a very, very short time frame. So I wanted to include that, just even if it's a temporary thing or if it's on a small scale, just to kind of supplement it. You can literally treat these like your vitamins. So you're not going to be literally growing an entire microgreen salad, but you could toss a handful in, reduce your seed input, but still get some nutrition in immediate return. All right. So I wanted one more quote, and it says, "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." And it's a super common gardening quote, but I believe is more true today than ever. There's a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty in our food system and with this pandemic going on. And I think that a lot of people are living in this second mindset. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing all the time, I think that thinking to the future and looking at the other side of this pandemic and this situation that we're in, there can be a lot of hope, and there can be a lot of growth and a lot of time to learn from this and grow from this. So I just wanted to finish up with that quote. I'm not sure how much more time I have, Heather, but I do have, how much time do I have? I can go into some other resources that people may have in their home to grow.
You have about 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So
okay.
So a lot of good questions.
Awesome. So I'll go over a few of the resources that I have for everybody, and then I'll spend a few minutes going over some of the things that you may have around your house to get started on some of your other vegetable crops, like seed starting and that kind of thing. So I do weekly YouTube videos, and they're all based on Central Florida gardening. Some of them are going to just be like beginner intro videos, like how to plant beans. But some of them are going to be more in depth. They're going to be dealing with pest issues or what to plant when. My video this week coming up is going to be 10 leafy greens to plant for your summer vegetable garden here in Florida. A lot of people limit themselves and think leafy greens are limited to lettuces, but there are a ton of varieties out there. I'm putting together a presentation I'll probably give within the next few weeks, but I'm up to 30 different leafy greens that you can grow year round here in Florida. So don't limit yourself on that, and definitely check out the channel if you're interested in getting those weekly tips. And I also have on my website a ton of resources, local resources, some of which may be open, some of which may not right now, but lumber yards if you're interested in building your raised beds, different books that I've found really helpful, bulk soil suppliers, a little of this, a little of that. So a ton of resources on the website. And I do also have a Florida Seed Club. So a lot of people, clients and students that I was working with would attend the class, but they still weren't necessarily sure on what varieties. So like, okay, they got the what to plant when cheat sheet, and they say grow tomatoes in the winter, but which tomatoes grow best here? I started the Seed Club where I mail out 3 different varieties of in-season heirloom seed, and they all come with a seed success card. So they had come with planting tips and everything like that, so that you can kind of get an idea of varieties that thrive here, alternative greens that you may not have been into. I usually try to include at least 1 leafy green per shipment, but right now it's been a really convenient way for people to get seeds since so much is shut down, and the seed websites and everything have been holding orders and stuff. So all right, so that's that, and I'm gonna switch my screen share, and I'll try to pull up some videos that I have on my YouTube channel. Let's see, okay. And I have one of them is a lot of people, especially right now, which is amazing, everybody's trading plant starts and everything, trying to share what they have. If you have tomatoes, you're giving them to a friend. They may be giving you, you know, some okra starts or whatever. And a lot of times we're using those plastic pots, which is not ideal. So I have a video on how to make, I think that's the right link. So I have a video on how to make newspaper pots. They hold up really well. Like I plant my tomato starts in it, and I don't. They'll last me until I transplant them into the garden. So a lot of people think that the newspaper pots will deteriorate really quickly. My name's So these are the newspaper pots that you can make. You literally just wrap it around a can. It takes less than 30 seconds to make. They hold up for the entire length until you pot them into the ground. And the other nice thing about them is you don't disturb the root system when you do it like that, because you don't have to remove the paper at all. It'll decompose once it's in contact with that wet soil. So the roots will grow right through it. So this is a really wonderful way to exchange plants and not have a constant output on your end. So it's just an easy way to be able to share without you having to pay as much, right? So that's a really wonderful thing to be able to do with items from around your house. Catalogs work as well. Just make sure that it's not glossy paper. You don't want any of the like glossy insert. They use a different ink. It doesn't degrade the same. It's not what you're looking for. One of the other videos that could be helpful for getting started with things from around the house is this video here. And sorry, it's talking over. But I did an entire video on starting sweet potatoes in containers from around the house. So I use an old shopping bag, you know, the reusable shopping bags that has a tear in it, using the different totes that had a crack in it and no lid. So there's a lot of household items that we can use, even if you don't have a raised bed already. A lot of times all you have to do is look around the house and you'll find something that you can grow in. And I know a lot of people right now aren't wanting to go out, which is justifiable. So, you know, you may not want to go to the lumber yard and buy the lumber, or you may not want to go to the garden store to purchase the soil. A lot of these things, although it's not the most sustainable, at least right now, it may make more sense. You can get, a bag of soil purchased online and delivered to your door. You can use the items from around your house. You can build yourself a little mini garden so that at least you can get growing quickly with things that don't have a lot of input. The front yard garden that I have going right now, I ended up using, speaking of upcycling, I used these old, I had a friend who was an accountant for a construction firm, and there was a bunch of PVC, giant PVC culvert things left over from a job. They sat in the parking lot there for years, so he took them home. His wife wanted a garden. They're my best friends, but they're not even thinking about gardening now when everybody is like, oh my gosh, I need to grow something. So it's never gonna happen. Anyhow, I commandeered these from him and I repurposed these as raised beds. So literally all a raised bed is soil raised above the ground. And it doesn't even have to be in a container. So my last house, I did mounded rows of soil on top of mulch. Basically, we're just trying to give, although I covered some crops that do well in our soil, most of them are going to want more nutrition, more moisture retention, and a lot more loamy soil. So a lot of your traditional garden vegetables are going to need higher quality soil. So any sort of container works. Don't limit yourself or think that you need a lot of money to make these happen. So I have this video here. It's basically like a modified sheet mulching lasagna layering method. Because the beds were so deep, I didn't want to waste my precious compost filling these things. So yeah, there's a lot of ways and techniques that you can use to minimize your financial input to get a garden started. So I think that those were some of the different ones that I wanted to highlight. I'm trying to think of, I do have on YouTube, it's a long one, but I did a 1 hour introductory course. If you're just getting started, I know not everybody's been plugged into SUAC for very long, so they may not have your garden started, or if you have friends that are looking to get started, it's a 1 hour basically jump start for gardening. And it talks about sunlight in Florida gardens, how to build your soil, how to start from seed, which I highly, highly recommend if possible, versus starts. This is a perfect example of why you would want to be able to start from seed right now, so you don't have to be going to stores. It saves you a ton of money. There's a host of benefits, and also planting with the seasons. So that's a full 1 hour class on the YouTube channel, which is very basic beginner gardeners. It's not for anybody who's been around the block or growing for a few seasons, but anybody who's looking to get started, that could be a really good place to start. And I do have the Victory Garden video as well, which is something that I really believe could be a really instrumental thing. Corrine was talking about how we can create change because people's minds are a little more open now with everything going on, but this is something that we can also create as an example and continue on afterwards. So my hope would be that this renewed interest in gardening could be something that lasts. Once you start growing a garden, I think that it's something that you quickly and easily become hooked on, and it becomes a part of your life. So I think that is it for me. So if there's any questions, Heather? Or...
Yeah, we have a ton of questions. I'm excited to get to them. I'm going to go back and forth between the chat box and the Q&A. So we had a couple questions about your seed club and if you have openings or if you're still selling seed.
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough. I have the wholesale account with Southern Exposure Seed Company. That's who I purchase. They are not my seed. I don't have large enough space to produce the quantity of seed that I'm sending out to everybody, but they're all varieties that I grow myself and that work really well here. So they are still shipping out to the wholesalers. They haven't closed it down to us yet. So I don't foresee any interruption in that club. And I am still taking new members. I'm going to be shipping out tomorrow, maybe the next day for April. So otherwise it'll be, if you sign up after that point, it would just be for the following month.
And can people sign up by visiting your YouTube channel or emailing you?
You can email me. I can put that in the chat box, but the ideal way would just be to go to my website, which is theurbanharvest.com, which I'll also put in the chat box. And you can do it all online. It's all automated and super easy to do. All right, so let's see here. It's the urban. Oh wait, that's sent privately. How do I fix that?
You have to click where it says my name maybe and go to all panelists.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, all attendees. And attendees.
And my email. So there's the email.
And the YouTube, I'll put the YouTube channel. I thought I sent it to all panelists and attendees, but I just sent it to all panelists.
Too many options.
Yeah, harvest. YouTube.com/theurbanharvest. So next question is about what's the best way to quickly augment sandy soil. They actually said soily sand, which I would say is closer to what we have in a lot of parts of Florida,
yeah.
But sandy soil.
All right, so if you're looking to grow in ground, just know that it'll be hard to maintain the nutrients for very long in our sandy soil, which is typically why most people choose to grow in some sort of raised bed. But like I said, a raised bed does not have to be a traditional raised bed where you have boxes. So anything, even if it's a layer of mulch with soil mounded on top that you build up as your super fertile soil, If you're looking for water retention to hold moisture in their soil, coconut coir is a wonderful soil amendment. It has zero nutritional value to it, but it's really, really good at holding moisture so that you have to water your garden less. So that's a good soil amendment. I am a huge proponent for worm castings. If there was one soil amendment that I would recommend, it would be worm castings. It's super high in NPK and all of your micronutrients, but it also is, so in organic and sustainable gardening, our goal is to create a soil ecosystem. If we feed the soil feeds our plants, and we get to step back. So we're not doing this constant input of water-soluble fertilizers mid-season just to keep the plants going. Feed the soil and you'll have healthy, happy plants. The worm castings help create that ecosystem in the soil. So worm castings, if you're not familiar, are worm poop. So it has gone through their digestive tract, and just like we have good gut buddies in our digestive tract, they do too, and that's sent out with their poop. So all of those good gut bacteria that they have in there are then basically inoculated into their castings. So it's kind of, especially if you're really just starting your garden, it's a really good way to jumpstart the soil ecosystem, because you're putting in all of these beneficial bacteria into the soil to kind of get that process and that ecosystem started. So that's one of my favorite soil amendments. There's also, it's kind of harder to access now, but typically I would say go to the beach, get some seaweed. Those are kind of closed right now, although boat ramps are not. I wouldn't necessarily harvest directly from a boat ramp, but oftentimes you can still find some washed ashore in some of the different parks and stuff that are open. If you can't find that, kelp meal, which is essentially seaweed, it's all one and the same. It's really got growth hormones in it, which can help your plants. There's been university studies that show that plants grow faster, stronger, and healthier with some sort of kelp or seaweed amendment. So that's a really good one to include. Typically it's free. Right now it may or may not be free, but I always recommend including that one as well.
Where do you get your coconut coir? That's a question we had in the chat box.
Yeah, so typically I would recommend a local resource, Avid Brewing, and I'll type that in the chat there. They are a gardening, they started out as a gardening and hydroponics store. They've been around for ages. They've, within the past couple of years, expanded into a brewery, and that's now what they're better known for. They are still open. So they were selling out of a lot of things rather quickly, but you can get it there. And they also have a ton of they have worm castings, they have all sorts of organic fertilizers, they have Fox Farm soil, they have seeds. I do have that's my brick and mortar location for seeds if you're having trouble sourcing them online or whatnot. It's a curated collection, all 4 Florida varieties that do really well here. So if you need seed packets, you can go there. They're awesome, and it's a local business. But that being said, I know that's not necessarily everybody's choice right now, so you can also find it online. You can get it from Amazon or whatever. If you do that, I have links on my page for recommended resources, and that'll take you directly through to Amazon. But I always recommend local first if possible.
Thank you. We have a couple sweet potato questions. One, I think Jen said she wanted to answer this. What do sweet potato leaves taste like, and how do you prepare them?
Who, me?
Answer, Jen? Yeah, it said you would like to answer it.
But that's I love sweet potato greens. You can eat them raw, like a salad. You can cook them. I've made saag paneer with them. So they don't have very much, if maybe at all, oxalic acid. I'm not entirely sure. So if you're concerned about the oxalic acid in some of the other greens like spinach or chard or something like that, you don't have to worry about that so much with sweet potato greens, and they have more nutrients than spinach apparently. So, and they go like crazy. So just do it. You don't even have to dig up I don't even like sweet potatoes. I just eat the greens.
And the other sweet potato question for you, Elise, is can you just take part of a sweet potato to grow more, or do you need the seed? It's from a beginner.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways you can start sweet potatoes. They're commonly started as slips, which is basically a section of the sweet potato. So if you've ever gone to the store or the potatoes have sat in your pantry too long and they come out and they have those little eyes on them, the little spud eyes, and most people will just like bump those off and cook and prepare their meal. Those are actually the start of a new plant, whether it be a potato or a sweet potato. Those would eventually start to vine and grow new plants. So you can start it from there. You can take little cuttings if you see any of those and put them in water, and it'll very quickly start growing the vine. That's one way to do it. You can also, if you have access to it, and I think that many of the SUAC community members would be more than happy to share, you can literally start them from vine clippings, as long as they have like 2 or 3 nodes, which is like where leaf attachments is. You can literally just take snippings of those and start sweet potatoes from that as well. So community gardens or time bank members, I assume, would probably be more than happy to share something like that. So usually very accessible from that as well.
We had a few questions about where to get the plants that you mentioned, and you mentioned time bank. Some people might be able to provide it. Someone specifically asked about moringa seeds, so if you can talk to getting plants during this time and getting seeds.
Yeah, so the seeds, I always recommend doing seed libraries and things like that, which are very limited and harder to access right now. So if you don't have a community garden nearby, and I will tell you, most people, even if they're growing on fairly large scale, if you're gardening on a home scale and not like a farmer, you buy a seed packet and you might plant a quarter of that seed packet. So if you have somebody that is in your neighborhood that's gardening, strike up a conversation and tell them that you're interested in growing, and do you have seeds that you would like to share or trade, or can I pay it forward in some way? It's a wonderful way to meet people in your area and to access seeds that have grown well there. Some of the online retailers have completely shut down. Some of them are just holding it. So they're basically like waiting until they catch up on orders and then they'll start shipping again. But check some of the online seed catalogs for shipping to you. And if Avid is still open, I haven't talked to them this week, but as of last week, they were still open. I have my seed there that you can access during their operating hours. They are shorter. I think it's like 10 to 3 or something like that. That they're open right now, I think it's Tuesday through Friday. But gardening isn't just about getting the seed, it's also about making the relationships. So try to source it from a friend or SUAC or time bank or whatever, because that's going to help you when you have questions later.
Great, thank you. We had a couple messages about Echo Farm has moringa seeds and they'll ship. Estefania also has moringa seeds to share.
I will say Echo Farm, to my knowledge, is closed temporarily through the summer. Their nursery, they're not shipping out or anything, unfortunately, right now. And they're closed to in-person visits, of course. So.
There's a lot of people that have